0705 hours. August 27th, the North Atlantic Ocean, 62 nautical miles southwest of the Lofoten Islands at the threshold where the Norwegian Sea narrows toward the entrance of the Barents. Something launches from depth. The VA-111 Shkval is not a conventional torpedo. It does not move through water the way a standard weapon does. It generates a supercavitating bubble around its entire body, a pocket of low-pressure gas that eliminates the friction of water contact and allows the weapon to travel at speeds approaching 200 miles per hour. Nothing in the ocean moves like it. It leaves a white scar across the surface, a froth trail of cavitation visible for miles in calm seas. The acoustic signature is unmistakable to anyone listening. The USS Indiana was listening. The target was the USS Gerald R. Ford, CVN-78, America's lead Gerald R. Ford-class nuclear carrier, displacing over 100,000 tons fully loaded, valued at $13.3 billion, carrying 75 aircraft and a crew of 4,500 sailors. She is not a ship in any conventional sense. She is a mobile sovereign airbase capable of projecting power across a 1,000-mile radius. The Shkval was inbound on her position. In the Ford's Combat Information Center, the AN/S PY-6V1 air and missile defense radar had the track before any human operator registered the acoustic alert. The system processes thousands of contacts simultaneously, updating track files in fractions of a second, computing threat classifications and intercept geometries automatically. The red dot on the tactical display was new, fast, and closing. Every alarm in the CIC went active at once. The Shkval closed the distance at its characteristic velocity, a white line drawn across the Atlantic at nearly 4 times the speed of a conventional torpedo. The Ford's defensive systems generated intercept solutions. Crew members at weapons consoles confirmed readiness. The geometry ran its course. The weapon struck the Ford's hull on a glancing vector. Not a direct center mass impact. A grazing contact, enough to transfer energy through the hull plating, enough to register on every sensor aboard, enough to rattle loose gear and slosh liquid across consoles in the CIC. Not enough to breach the hull, not enough to cause casualties, not enough to produce the effect whoever authorized this launch had calculated when they programmed the firing solution. For Russia, a weapon described in official procurement documents as an unstoppable maritime deterrent had just demonstrated its combat effectiveness against the world's most advanced aircraft carrier by producing the nautical equivalent of a door knock. The Ford was undamaged. The political consequences for Moscow had already started accumulating. The USS Indiana, SSN-789, a Virginia-class Block IV attack submarine running passive sonar in the northeastern sector of the formation, had the launch point within seconds of weapon release. The acoustic signature of a Shkval leaving its tube is distinctive. The bearing resolution placed the firing platform 40 nautical miles northeast of the strike group, at a depth of approximately 300 meters. The contact was a Yasin M-class nuclear-powered attack submarine. Project 885M, Russia's most capable boat. The platform their Navy has spent the past decade positioning as the answer to Virginia-class dominance in deep water. The answer had just fired a shot that grazed its target and revealed its position. The Ford's SPY-6 radar updated with a new surface contact simultaneously. The Marshal Ustinov, a Slava-class guided missile cruiser, displacing 12,500 tons, was driving hard toward the U.S. formation at flank speed. The Slava class carries 16 P-500 Basalt anti-ship missiles in angled launchers mounted amidships. Each one carries a warhead capable of penetrating the magazine spaces of a carrier-class vessel. At combat radius, a coordinated salvo from the Ustinov represented a threat that required a response regardless of whatever assessment the CIC made about Russian intent. Fire control systems on the Ford's escorts locked onto the Ustinov. SM-2 and SM-6 solutions were current and held. The tactical picture had shifted from a covert torpedo attack to a two-axis confrontation. Subsurface threat from the northeast, surface threat closing from the north. The USS Thomas Hudner, DDG-116, an Arleigh Burke Flight 2A destroyer, began VLS preparation. The weapon designated for submarine prosecution was the RUM-139 VLAS-ROC, a rocket-propelled system that launches from a standard Mk-41 cell, climbs to altitude, deploys a Mark 54 lightweight torpedo by parachute, and delivers it to a precise point in the water column above the target's calculated position. The Mark 54 then descends through depth, activates its acoustic seeker, and hunts. At 300 meters, a damaged submarine with a degraded cooling system has limited maneuvering options. The Yasen M had a problem the Shkval launch had concealed from the outside world. The vessel's thermal management system had failed. A cooling loop malfunction in the nuclear plant's secondary circuit was forcing the crew to reduce reactor output to prevent a cascading casualty. The submarine was slower than her published specifications. Her sprint and drift evasion capability, the core of a nuclear submarine's defensive doctrine, was compromised. She needed to reach Severomorsk. She needed time she did not have. The Marshal Ustinov was not maneuvering to attack. She was maneuvering to buy that time, placing 12,500 tons of radar-visible cruiser between the U.S. strike group and the retreating submarine, forcing American attention toward a surface threat that could be managed rather than a subsurface one that, if prosecuted aggressively, would produce a fundamentally different kind of incident. Inside the Ford's CIC, the senior officers read the geometry and understood what they were looking at. The cruiser was a screen, not a spearhead. The torpedo had been a provocation, not the opening salvo of a war. The Yasen M was running. The Ustinov was covering the exit. The VLAS ROC launch order was suspended. The submarine was heading north, prosecuting a crippled Russian nuclear boat in international waters, while its surface screen was actively maneuvering, and both sides had weapons hot was a decision whose second and third order consequences ran well past the tactical horizon. The Ford's commanders didn't need to destroy the Yasen M to win this engagement. They needed to demonstrate that they could have. 4 FA/18E Super Hornets launched from the Ford's flight deck in sequence, one every 30 seconds, afterburners lighting the gray dawn over the North Atlantic. Each aircraft carried AIM-120 DAMR, AAMS, and AIM-9X Sidewinder missiles. They climbed north, establishing a combat air patrol barrier between the Russian surface contact and the formation. Behind them, an E-2D Advanced Hawkeye airborne early warning aircraft lifted off, its AN/APS-145 radar already spinning, a flying sensor node that could see every aircraft, every surface vessel, and every radar emission across 300 nautical miles of battle space and distribute that picture in real time to every platform in the formation. The Hawkeye is what transforms a collection of individual assets into an integrated network. Without it, the Super Hornets are capable fighters working with their own sensors. With it, they are terminals in a distributed targeting system that knows more about the adversary's position than the adversary knows about theirs. The EA/18G Growler launched next. The Growler is an FA/18F airframe converted for electronic attack. AN/ALQ-218 tactical jamming receivers, AN/ALQ-99 jamming pods, a crew of 2 whose job is to identify, characterize, and systematically deny the electronic picture that an adversary depends on to operate. Against a fighter pilot whose radar scope is filling with structured interference and whose missile seekers are chasing signals that don't correspond to real aircraft, the Growler is the most dangerous platform in the airspace. It doesn't need to shoot anyone down. It makes everyone else unable to shoot accurately either. The Su-35S jets arrived from the north approximately 6 minutes after the Hornets established their patrol. 2 of them flying at low altitude, a technique designed to compress radar acquisition range from surface systems and keep the approach beneath the Hawkeye's optimal detection geometry for as long as possible. These were not attack aircraft on an intercept run. They were the aerial component of the same covering operation that Ustinov was performing on the surface. Visible, loud, attention-consuming distractions intended to give the Yasen M more time and more distance. The lead Su-35 crossed the bow of a Super Hornet at uncomfortably close range, a maneuver designed to break the American pilot's concentration and force a defensive reaction. His wingman executed a different play simultaneously, activating his IRST targeting system and locking onto the EA/18G Growler. The Growler's threat warning system registered the lock. The pilot had defensive countermeasures active before the tone fully registered in his headset. An R-73 missile separated from the Su-35's wingtip station. Short range, highly agile, heat-seeking. Against a maneuvering aircraft at close quarters, the R-73 is a serious weapon. The Super Hornet it was tracking responded with a brake turn at sustained high G loading and deployed countermeasures. The flares produced the infrared signature the missile's seeker prioritized over the aircraft's engine exhaust, and the weapon tracked the false heat source into empty air before detonating. The American response was immediate. An AIM-9X launched from a Super Hornet against one of the Su-35s. The Russian pilot recognized the launch, pulled into a climbing reversal, and held his countermeasures dispenser open continuously through the maneuver. The Sidewinder's seeker shifted between the aircraft and the flare signatures through the turn. The missile lost priority lock and impacted the water. Neither side had destroyed anything. Both sides had fired weapons in live conditions. The distinction between that outcome and a different one had come down to the response times of defensive systems and the countermeasures training of pilots under genuine threat. The second Su-35 descended to 60 feet above the waterline and made a high-speed pass directly along the USS Thomas Hudner's port side, crossing within 150 meters of the hull at supersonic velocity. The pressure wave hit the ship hard enough to vibrate unsecured equipment in the CIC. Sailors on the weather decks felt the concussion through their boots. The maneuver was calculated provocation, an act intended to produce an escalatory response that could be characterized publicly as American aggression initiating a conflict. Inside the Hudner's CIC, the AN/SLQ-32 V6 electronic warfare suite was recording every pulse of every emission the Su-35 produced during that pass. Radar operating frequencies, IRST seeker parameters, communication channel selections, missile seeker characteristics from the R-73 that had been fired. All of it logged. All of it building a signals intelligence profile of exactly which aircraft had been in this airspace, what equipment each one carried, and how that equipment performed under actual combat conditions. The Hudner's crew was not only defending, they were building a database. Below the surface, the USS Indiana extended her towed array sonar to maximum deployment depth and held position on the Yasen-M's projected track toward Kola. British and Norwegian P-8A Poseidon maritime patrol aircraft, already airborne on coordinated sorties planned 36 hours in advance, when the Yasen-M's departure from Severomorsk was first detected by signals intelligence, began deploying sonobuoy fields across the submarine's transit corridor. The pattern combined passive buoys listening at thermocline depth with active buoys pinging at programmed intervals, forcing the submarine to maneuver around the ping geometry and in doing so reveal its position to the passive listeners. There was no gap in the coverage the Yasen-M could navigate through without being tracked. The ocean is large. The surveillance architecture the US and its NATO partners maintain across the North Atlantic is larger, more persistent, and more continuously updated than Russian naval doctrine appears to have modeled when this operation was authorized. The Marshal Ustinov held position for another 12 minutes at the edge of the formation, her targeting radar painting the Ford's Island structure, and the SM-6 solutions on the Ramage and Hudner remaining current the entire time. The cruiser's captain eventually broadcast withdrawal on the emergency coordination frequency, logging a message that characterized the operation as a routine patrol concluding on schedule. The analysts at 6th Fleet Headquarters who received the transmission noted the phrasing with the professional appreciation reserved for communications that are technically coherent and operationally disconnected from observable reality simultaneously. The Su-35s broke off contact to the east when their fuel margins reached bingo threshold. They had not been driven off by missiles. They had been methodically outmaneuvered for the duration of their fuel endurance by aircraft guided by a sensor network they couldn't blind with their own jamming and couldn't match with their own situational awareness. The Growler's jamming had filled their radar scopes with structured noise for most of the engagement. Their picture of the battlespace had been degraded continuously while the Hawkeye's picture had remained clean. The Yasen-M made Severomorsk under her own power. The U.S. Navy tracked her the entire transit. The tactical accounting was unambiguous. Russia had deployed a nuclear attack submarine, a Slava-class surface combatant, and 2 Su-35 air superiority fighters in a coordinated multi-domain operation representing significant planning, authorization at senior levels, and material cost. The Shkval had grazed its target without penetrating the hull. The cruiser had been held at weapons range distance by fire control solutions it had no realistic prospect of defeating. The fighters had fired a missile that missed and been outmaneuvered until their fuel ran out by a network-guided force operating with a complete and current picture of the battlespace. The Ford's flight deck resumed normal recovery operations by 0732. The Indiana retracted her towed array and returned to patrol depth. The Hudner and the Ramage rejoined the formation. The signals intelligence collected from Russian radar emissions, missile seeker frequencies, and command communication channels during those 27 minutes went into databases that will inform U.S. electronic warfare planning, threat library updates, and rules of engagement development for years. Russia spent a morning demonstrating the operational ceiling of its current naval doctrine against a carrier strike group that had been tracking the Yasin M since she cleared Kola waters. That gap between what one side could see and what the other assumed they were concealing was the determining factor in this engagement before the first weapon was ever fired. The North Atlantic has not been a dark ocean for US and Allied forces since the Cold War produced the hydrophone arrays, the continuous patrol aircraft routes, and the subsurface tracking protocols that now cover it without interruption. A force that understands how to operate in that surveillance environment holds an awareness advantage that individual platform capabilities cannot overcome regardless of published performance data. Russia came north to test a boundary. What they encountered was a boundary that had been monitoring their preparation for the test since the Yasin M left port. That is the part this engagement makes visible. Knowing an adversary might be watching does not help when the network watching is more integrated and more current than anything available to contest it. The Yasin M's crew never had a clear picture of what they were operating against. The Ford's crew knew that submarine's position before the Shkval left its tube. That difference is not a tactical advantage, it is the entire contest. If this breakdown gave you a clear picture of how multi-domain naval operations work in practice, subscribe and share it. More of these analyses keep coming as long as you are here for them.